CBS Atlanta News presents Public Affairs on Peach.
My poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Atlantans are gearing up for a commemorative march on Washington this month to mark the 50th anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. Good Sunday morning to you. I'm Adam Murphy, consumer investigative reporter for CBS Atlanta. We are just days away from that commemorative march, and there has already been much anticipation and celebration right here in Atlanta. From the fountain outside the Carter Center a few weeks ago to the images on the National Mall in D.C. 50 years ago.
Sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down at the table of brotherhood.
Bernice King borrowed words from her father's famous I Have a Dream speech.
My poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
She invited a captive audience to share in a meal and conversation about that dream. The event earlier this month started with a tour of the Carter Center. Here, the president is well known for his humanitarian work and can be seen in pictures alongside Dr. King's father, Martin Luther King Sr. The Georgia native told the audience Dr. King's legacy played a major role in his becoming president and that his dream had life in his administration.
As president, my most important visitors were from Georgia. Coretta and Benjamin Mays and Daddy King would come and tell me what I needed to do as president. And they reminded me that Martin Luther King Jr. was for human rights and for peace.
The March on Washington was a huge part of the civil rights movement, and Congressman John Lewis was front and center. Lewis is the sole survivor of the men known as the Big Six, the six civil rights leaders who led the march 50 years ago. He spoke to CBS Atlanta's Jennifer Mayerly about that historic day and what it means today.
He turned those marble steps of the Lincoln Memorial into a modern-day pulpit. He preached. I can hear him saying what he said on that day. When he said, I have a dream today, a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream today in keeping with the American dream. It was so moving, so powerful, and the people got with them. Some were saying amen, and some was just yelling and cheering, but he lifted them up, and they were inspired to go back to their hometowns and to the states to work for jobs, for freedom, for civil rights.
Had those words not been spoken on that day, where do you think we'd be today?
If Martin Luther King Jr. hadn't spoken those words, if he hadn't said what he said, I don't know where we would be as a nation and as a people. That's why I call Dr. King one of the founding fathers of the new America, because on that day, he helped free not just a people, but he helped liberate a nation.
Wow, well said, Congressman Lewis. You can see more of Jennifer Mayerly's interview with John Lewis on CBS Atlanta next Tuesday and Wednesday. She'll be in Washington, D.C. with live coverage of the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington and Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. Now I want to introduce you to a man who was Dr. King's driver. This is very interesting. Tom Houck, thank you so much for being here,
Adam.
And so you were an 18-year-old young white man, and you come to Atlanta in 1965, as I understand, and take a job with the SCLC.
Well, it was a lot more than that. I actually got kicked out of high school in 1965 for going to the Selma March and staying 2 weeks and experiencing my first arrest. And so I got involved in SCLC in 1966, actually, when I was about 18 or 19 years old. I came back to Atlanta from working in the field with Hosea Williams and several other people in SCLC. And Dr. King invited me over to his house for lunch because I had just come on a bus. I was going to answer mail for Dr. King. And he asked me if I I had my driver's license. Actually, Mrs. King asked me if I had my driver's license, and I said yes. And she said, would you mind taking the kids to school tomorrow? She said, I've been having trouble with a driver that was helping us out here. I said, no, of course I didn't know much about Atlanta, the streets, and so I said I'd be delighted to. So there I was, fresh into the role of driver, and I spent 9 months driving for the King family and Dr. King.
And what was that like to get to know the family so intimately?
Remarkable. I mean, it set a stage for me in Atlanta because, you know, the Kings were very plugged into the community, and I would get to meet people that I would not have met had I just been a worker in the civil rights movement. But through the King family, I got to know the city real well. And that's played out real well for me over the years because I have backed every mayor since Maynard Jackson in 1973 and have got involved in the political process of the city. I would not be in Atlanta today had it not been for Martin Luther King Jr.
Were they an ordinary family, just like any other family?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Dr. King would take the kids swimming at the Y, and I'd play football with them outside. They used to call me Uncle Tom, as a double entendre, so to speak. But no, they were a remarkable, very, very good family. I mean, the kids were not spoiled. Dr. King didn't have guards and police all over the place protecting him. I was probably his bodyguard, if you want to talk about it that way. But of course, I had no experience in that. The King family was remarkably normal.
Now, you're working on a book right now, Tom. Is that correct?
I'm hoping that one day, in the not too distant future, that there will be a book called Looking at History in My Rearview Mirror, Driving Dr. King.
Wow. And so what do you go into in this book? Can you give us a small excerpt of what we might...
I would talk about, it's going to be kind of a part memoir on my part, okay, in my experiences of, I took the case of segregated jails to the Supreme Court and Birmingham March and Birmingham too. But it really would be also a kind of reflection of what went on inside the King household, which no one really to this day has written. And it will talk about the fact that Martin was a chain smoker. Dr. King was a chain smoker, and Coretta when I would drive him back home. Oftentimes he would drive, by the way, and he was a terrible driver, horrible driver, right? I mean, he really was.
He was a terrible driver, but yet he had a vision down the road.
Right. By the way, we didn't have cell phones in those days. We didn't have, we didn't, basically, when I was in the car with him, was either, we were talking to each other because there weren't no cell phones, and so it was always good conversations.
And so when you were doing this, and you would drive the entire family, not just the...
No, I would take the kids to school.
Take the kids to school.
I mean, Coretta would often drive herself, and Dr. King would often drive himself. As I said, he was a terrible driver. There were two cars. He had a black Chevrolet that he drove, and then Coretta drove a green Pontiac.
Wow. Dr. King's driver, Tom Houck, lives here in Atlanta. Great job. Thank you for joining us.
And Thursday will be a big day, so I hope that, Wednesday rather will be a big day, because I think that the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington is something we all should be commemorating.
Tom, thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you, Adam.
Great job. Well, when we come back, we'll take a look at the Atlanta neighborhood where Dr. King grew up and the huge revitalization effort to bring it back to its former glory. That's coming up next.